I don't know why I even brought this up here. It's just more for decoration. I'm going to pretty much be talking off the cuff right here. Right now, I'm going to take my hat off. I know some of you know me as the Director of Government Affairs for the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. I'm going to take my hat off right now and just be Todd Bowers, an OIF veteran, so I can speak very candidly about some of the experiences I had when I came home. I kind of had an interesting military career. When I graduated high school, I was a little bit of a lost one, didn't know where I was going to end up. My father had been a Marine, and I remember when I first approached my parents, I said, listen, this is something I feel very strongly about. I really want to do this. And my father said, that's fine, but he said, just understand, you'll never be the same person again, and it will be for the better. And I hold that very dear. I'm very proud to be a Marine. I love my service. I'll be a Marine as long as I possibly can be. But I knew that taking that big jump, and this was granted about 10 years ago, we were in a very different climate. And I knew that the jump I was making could eventually change, and sure enough it did, September 11, 2001. Everybody in the military, their lives drastically changed at that point. One of the things that I knew that I would be facing was the possibility of danger. But there was a danger that I never really learned about, and that was the experiences that I would face in regards to mental health injuries and things along those lines. On my first deployment in Iraq, I was with the initial invasion force. We pushed all the way up from Kuwait up to Baghdad. It was a life-altering experience. We were the battalion that actually found the Jessica Lynch convoy and supported her rescue. But we had a very different job. We conducted civil military operations, where our entire role was to reduce civilian interference with combat operations. And that sounds very difficult to do, obviously, when the bullets are flying, but our entire role is to keep the civilians alive and to make sure that we leave them with stability once we push through and combat is over. I remember the first time when I physically saw someone dealing with combat stress. It was a captain that was with the battalion that I was serving with, and we pushed north of Al-Nasiriyah. And while we were stopped there, mortars started to come in, and everybody frantically was looking for a place to hide, to get behind Humvees and whatnot. And I looked up and I saw this individual, and he was opening up an MRE on the hood of the Humvee as the mortars were coming in. And I went back and forth with another NCO, and we said, what's he doing? We sort of came to the conclusion, that's the toughest Marine I've ever seen. Bombs are coming in, and he's having chicken cavatelli on the hood of the Humvee. We eventually got up after yelling and approached the captain and realized he was completely glazed over and he didn't know where he was or what was happening at that time. We walked him over almost like a child to a fighting hole and set him down, and he kept eating his MRE. It shocked me because it was something that I was not ready to deal with and ready to experience. But it was at that moment that I realized even the strongest, toughest individuals can face these difficult times that is sometimes just overwhelming. But the hardest thing to be able to convey to people, and this is something that we at IAVA are very, very adamant about, is that it is not a permanent injury. You can seek treatment. I often tell my Marines, if you're having difficulties adjusting, you need to be able to put a bandage on that wound and keep going forward. The same goes with mental health injuries. You can seek treatment. You can persevere over what you're dealing with and become a stronger Marine, in my eyes, if you do that. On my second deployment, it was very different than my first deployment. I was assigned to the lovely city of Al-Fallujah during the push in November of 2004. If you all haven't been there, please visit it. It's gorgeous. But it was very difficult conducting civil military operations there. While I was there, on one of our patrols, we were ambushed. And me being a relatively good shooter, I was placed up on the front lines to try and engage snipers that were firing at us. It was during that time that I realized there was a civilian car that had gotten caught in the crossfire, and I was able to see through my scope that there was individuals still alive in the vehicle. Well, the civil affairs switch turned on, and I said, I need to get to those folks. I need to help them out. As I was trying to get over there, a sniper got real lucky and basically hit me on the left side of my face. The sniper's round hit the top of my rifle, and the bullet sort of came apart. And other than not being able to hear out of my left ear or see a good portion out of my left eye, I consider myself extremely fortunate to be here right now. It also comes in handy because I call that my girlfriend's side. So when she's yelling at me, I just replace her over there. It helps me deal with some of the stresses. But that single incident that happened to me, I did not know would revisit me every day for the rest of my life. I wasn't prepared for that. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just something you deal with in combat. But for me, what made it very significant was what happened when I came home. One thing I always wanted to do was I always wanted to stay at the Watergate Hotel. So I used a satellite phone. Thank you for the tax dollars. I know it's not really the right thing to do, but I used a satellite phone and made a reservation for the Watergate when I came back from Fallujah. That's what I wanted to do. I just thought that'd be a great thing. My family came back. They lived in Arizona at the time, and they stayed with me. And my sister came. Now, my sister is much older than me. We had the typical sibling relationship. She's 7 years older than me, where she beat the crap out of me until that one day where I got bigger, and it stopped there. We've always been great friends. We get along incredibly. I talk to her just about every night. But something happened when I came home with my sister, and I've never really spoken about this before, and it's a little uncomfortable to do so now, so you'll have to bear with me. But my sister, on the third night that I was home, we were hanging out in my hotel room in the Watergate. And we were talking about things, and she was conveying to me how frustrated she was that I was planning on staying in the Marine Corps and continue to seek deployments. And she told me about the difficulties she had while she was at home, and I was dealing with my parents and the difficulties they had while I was deployed. An argument ensued, and next thing I knew, she had hit me in the face. And as some of the Marines can attribute to, I did what's called snatching someone up. And I grabbed my sister, held her on the ground, and screamed at her in a way that I can't take back. That was hard, and that was very difficult for me. Because I realized that I had changed in a way that I wasn't prepared to change. And I did permanent damage with my sister. She wanted to be here today, actually. She was going to be here today because we wanted to discuss this because it was very difficult for us to push through this. What I had done that is very common with Marines, it's a typical thing. I snatch people up all the time. I had put my sister in that role. And that is not anywhere she should be. And that was very difficult for me because something had manifested out of control. And that's when I realized that I had definitely changed from these experiences and I needed to address them. I needed to get myself squared away because, by God, that was not going to be the end of my Marine Corps career. That sniper didn't hit me for a reason, and I was going to pursue what I was meant to do in the Marine Corps. After 3 months, my sister and I, we didn't speak. I went from talking to her all the time. She didn't want to talk to me anymore, and I understand why. It was during those 3 months, the summer of 2005, that I started reaching out for resources. I was not going to let this injury, change me. I found the vet center here in Washington, D.C., and went in and started speaking to folks and found that, wow, I wasn't a victim. That this was a very common thing that many people deal with, and that you can handle these emotions, and you can control them, and you can continue to be very productive in your life. It was at that point that I flew out to Los Angeles, where my sister was living at the time, and humbly begged for forgiveness. I tried to explain to her, and it was interesting because while I was out there, I found out she had done the exact same thing. She had sought treatment, and she had been looking for someone for some answers. And it was very difficult for her because she didn't have the same resources that I had. It was something that again, it's very uncomfortable to talk about, and I apologize. I was choking on the Jolly Rancher, by the way. All right, so anybody tells my gunny that I stirred the water up, I'll choke him. All right, so. But the other aspect I want to touch on, I made notes here also, was the aspect of emotional numbing. Obviously, you can tell mine's kind of faded away over the past few years. But when I first came home from my deployment, I had absolutely no emotions whatsoever. And my beloved Auntie Lane passed away 2 weeks after I came home. It was very awkward because at the funeral, obviously, my sister was there and we were not talking. But that was when my family started to recognize that I had undergone many changes because I did not cry at her funeral whatsoever. I could not conjure up the tears. I loved my Auntie Lane to death, but I just could not feel any emotion whatsoever. And that is exactly what you want people to experience in combat. You want individuals to be at this point where they can push forward through some of the most difficult times and be able to take care of those on the left and right. But it's hard to flip that off when you come home. And it's okay to take some time to have that switch come back on, but it's important for the families to understand what you're going through and that you may be numb. And it's not because you're being a jerk. It's not because you don't care about anything. It's just because you're in a place where you're adjusting. It's very difficult to go from one day the streets of Fallujah to 4 days later, sitting on your sofa talking with your family. And that makes things very difficult. My girlfriend right now saw a fit of anger once, and it was interesting because it's what I talked about in traffic. Traffic is the most frustrating thing in the world. I don't know what it is, but I think every veteran experiences 66 at 5:30. Come on, that's worse than Ramadi and Christmas, So, but she experienced it once when we had just moved in together, and I was driving her car, and we had a load of groceries in the back and everything else, and we were getting ready for our exit, and someone cut me off and slammed on the brakes, and this roar came out of me, out of nowhere. And I remember looking over at her, and she just had this look of like, where's Todd and where did he just go? And I realized that these ridiculous, bouts of anger, they're very difficult to control. But now she and I have sort of worked out a system. And it takes a lot of responsibility on my part. And this is something that I learned actually through the Vet Center. We've come up with a system of almost codes. When I'm in a situation where I'm feeling cornered or I'm not feeling comfortable with where I'm at and everything else, it's very easy because I can just look at Sandra, and when she sees me do this, that means I'm going to leave, and don't be mad that I'm leaving. But I just need to remove myself from the current situation. She's also done the same where when she sees me starting to have my switch flip or whatnot, she can recognize it sometimes before I can. She can see me sort of start jittering, and she can tell that my comfort zone is being tapped into. And so she has a little signal that she does to me, and that's when she just pulls her ear back like this. And that means evaluate yourself right now. Figure out what you're doing. It works out great. Whether that's going to work for everybody, I don't know. But for her and I, it works out outstanding. Problem is when I have a nice aftershave, I do this a lot, so she constantly thinks I'm freaking out. So that sometimes makes things difficult. But one of the things, I just returned from a deployment to Peru. I was down there for 4 months doing a humanitarian aid mission. And it was very exciting for me because I often wondered, after these experiences I had after my deployments in Iraq, I wondered, would I be able to put the uniform on again and leave my friends and family and do these things? And I was so excited because I did. And I felt very comfortable. I didn't have any issues whatsoever. And it made me realize that if you get the help that you need on whatever level it is, you can continue to be a contributing member to the armed services. It's just like a gunshot wound. You can treat it and you can continue to serve. Obviously, there's varied levels of what people experience, but it's very important. One of the things that we always work on in IAB is that we're realizing the stigma amongst mental health. Why has it taken me 3 years to talk about these experiences? Well, the stigma is very strong. We're rough, tough Marines. We don't have emotions, all right? Well, that's true in some cases, but it's important to be able to reduce that stigma. And one of the things that we have found, the only way that we are ever going to truly be able to reduce the stigma in regards to people seeking treatment along these lines, is to make it mandatory confidential counseling. Right now, the military utilizes an electronic system called the Post-Deployment Health Reassessment Form, which is basically a bubble sheet of what your experiences were. While this is a good screening process, service members are still required to self-diagnose. I always laugh when I fill it out, and then I sit down across from somebody and they say, "Do you need help?" I say, "I don't know, your name has MD after it, you're supposed to tell me." And we aren't able to self-diagnose ourselves. And until there is across-the-board mandatory screening, we are not going to have that stigma removed. To try and work with this, we at IABA have partnered with the Ad Council on a 3-year campaign to reduce the stigma amongst service members in the military. I invite you all to turn your TVs on this Veterans Day because that's when that ad campaign will be launching. Our goal is to not make people look like victims. Our goal is to show that these individuals are strong, and just because they are dealing with these experiences, there is nothing wrong with it. And that is going to be something that we're very excited for. It's going to be a print ad. It's going to have web resources available for service members. It's going to be across the board what I truly believe the most effective element to reduce stigma in regards to people seeking mental health treatment out there. One of the things that we've also learned with a lot of our members is that these conflicts have relied heavily on the National Guard and Reserves. Approximately 40% of those who have deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan and the surrounding countries have been from the National Guards and Reserves. And when the gunning mentioned that there's people who sometimes fall through the cracks because they deploy with separate units, that is a very common occurrence. They come home and do not have the resources available to stay with their units, to have people keep an eye on them. That's why this mandatory face-to-face mental health counseling that we call for would be within 30 to 90 days upon their return. There's currently 2 pilot programs being run right now by the National Guard. One of them is in Maryland, and I've been able to witness this reintegration program firsthand, and it is incredible. And we are hoping to make that a mold across the country so that people will have these resources available when they come home and when they've started to realize that things are a little different now. And we want them to understand, as a part of that step, there's nothing wrong with that little bit of difference in your life. I think that's pretty much all I got on my chicken scratch here. But I'd like to leave this note with everybody. You know, what I've shared with you today and everything else is common for many individuals. They have these experiences, but it does not make them weaker in any way, shape, or form. I'll go toe-to-toe with any of you guys right now. All right? I'm proud of being in the Marine Corps. Just because I've had these experiences doesn't make me any lesser of a Marine. And in some ways, in my opinion, it makes me a better Marine, because it allows me to face my injuries and know that I can still continue to serve. Thank you very much.